Bueno, pues buenos días de nuevo.
Good morning again, everyone. So now let's get us started. This is the official inauguration of this doctoral seminar of the Angela Merkel's Award, The Good Fortune of Being United, Securing and Strengthening Europe's Cohesion. And we have the good fortune of having with us Franco Panciera, Head of Institutional Relations from the European Parliament office in Spain. And I would also like to thank Maria Andres Marin, her manager, who's always committed to collaborating with us and the institution they represent. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Mr. Panchiera's participation in this forum. You have the floor. So thank you, Yuste Foundation, the director, the mayor of Cuaco, the Yuste, and the Jean Monnet chair, the rest of professors and attendants. My name is Franco, but here in Spain, I know this name is not very popular. I have to adapt it. So if you bump into me, please call me Fran. So I come from Italy, but I've been living in Brussels for 20 years because I was working for the parliament. So I know the headquarters of our institution, but I've been spending the last 10 months in Madrid in the European Parliament office in Spain. So this is an office where we try to disseminate what the European Union does for the citizens. So thank you for having me here, and I'll try to be fast in speaking about the European Union so as not to make it any longer. So this year, the 9th of May, we celebrated the 75 years of history since the creation of the European Union with the Schuman Declaration, which 75 years ago marks the landmark when Jean Monnet decided to create something to reinforce the immunity of our democracies. So today in 2025, if we compare this year with the year of the declaration, well, the word is so different as we've heard from the first speakers. It's like a global fever. We have climate change, we have wars, we have tariffs, we have a competitiveness crisis and the fake information crisis. So our democracies are full of volatility, uncertainties that precedes any major historical change, just like before the Second World War. I hope this is not the herald to a new war. So although the EU is far from perfect, me and many more people and many people here think that it is a very useful instrument we have for us to manage a very complex world. It helps us reduce the tribal dependence we have on the matters of energy from Russia, and the military, in particular the NATO and the United States, and the productive dependence. So the European Union can be an antidote to immunize the health of our democracies. And in times of global anxiety, the EU strengthens its capacities like a vaccine, like during the pandemic. During this, for these 75 years of use, it has increased empathy. We have also increased, it's my belief, our critical thinking and the desire to understand those who do not think like us. In exceptional cases, there has been some slow decision making, but there's something that always works: the final result after the discussion, the exchange of information, and sometimes clashes. And this final unity is the response to the global deviation that we can see in the world. Unfortunately, this vaccine, this method is not yet marketed outside of the European Union, such as, for instance, the European Union as of now. So 2025 is a very round year because, well, we are celebrating the 75 years of the Schuman Declaration that I just mentioned, and also the 40 years since the signing of Spain's and Portugal's accession to the European Union, and also 20 years after the signing of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is of the uttermost importance, especially now, where there are a passion, an infinite passion for the non-traditional forms of government. For example, the younger generations are supporting non-democratic forms of government more and more. So I like to think that the real borders of the EU today are more than ever, and not in Latvia, Greece, or Portugal. The real borders are in Article 2 of the treaties. Those who talk about human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. These are the real elements that sets us apart from the rest of the world. And I said something that, well, I have mentioned earlier, geopolitics and the need of defense, as my president mentioned, the German chair. We are moving progressively towards a shared thought that something needs to be done about the defense and security in Europe. The result of the American elections changed the global stage, especially for the European Union. It means the way NATO is managed. So the feeling of instability that we have, even if it's quite unpleasant because we're feeling the threat, if we talk to colleagues in other countries that are around Russia, such as Poland, Estonia, Finland, feel a very unpleasant sense of insecurity more than the countries in the Iberian Peninsula because of the distance. I don't need to explain you that we don't know whether the US will give as much money as they used to for the defense of the continent. So there is fear, a widespread fear across Europe. But this is also an opportunity. If we look at the political project as something that will endure, we have to ask ourselves how many times in the past the countries in the European Club tried to create a common project in the field of defense. Many times, the Paris Treaty in 1952 tried to create a European Community of Defense that, well, didn't come to terms. It was rejected by France in 1954. Then there was another attempt to create a political policy for the defense and security in Maastricht and later in the treaties of Maastricht and the treaties of Amsterdam, with the aim of coordinating defense and security policies among the member states, but always by maintaining national independence. And now we are talking about defense, and we're not trying to reduce the national sovereignties, but there is some unanimity among countries because they feel that they're no longer secure unless they strengthen the level of defense, of shared defense among them. And there are some other attempts. For example, we have the Eurocorps. It was created in 1992 by France and Germany as a multinational peacekeeping force. In the US, we have just one model of helicopters, but in Europe, we have many companies that compete with each other to try and create different models. And of course, that is good for initiative making and competitiveness, but at the same time, it reduces the efficiency and competitiveness abroad. So there is some room for improvement to increase our competitiveness and reduce total expenses. And we also have some combat groups, units of 1,500 international soldiers. It was created in 2005. We have some groups that are in standby. They are designed to intervene in crisis or war scenarios. But then we have the war in Ukraine. We have a renewed momentum after the invasion of Ukraine that has really created some shared knowledge or shared awareness. And we now need to think about where are we standing and how far we want to go. And so this is not about attacking, this is about defending ourselves. We want to be ready if something happens, something that we wish will never happen, of course. But as I was saying last week, I met a member of parliament in a meeting, and he said, well, look at this battle. You're saying it's yours, but if you cannot defend it, then somebody can take it away from you. And then they will say, this is my battle. So you need to be able to defend yourselves. And you need to show that you can defend yourselves. That is a fundamental issue. You need to show how you can manage, how you can defend these countries. So as I was saying, we are celebrating 40 years of since the accession of Spain to the European Union, also Portugal. And in these 40 years, there has been huge progress in all fields of work. Free movement of people.
Desde la circulación.
So as I was saying, free movement of people, thanks to the Schengen Agreement, and also the monetary and political union, the single currency in 2002, and we've also been using the European funds for many things in this country. And we must not forget that for the very first years after the Spain's accession, Spain was one of the countries who benefited the most from the distribution of European funds. It was a huge boost to the country's economy. And then we have the euro. Needless to say, it was adopted in 2002. It was a very important element for the opening of the Spanish market to the European Union, and also for Spain to be able to buy in other markets. And there has been some huge political and social impacts too. For example, there has been a domestic political transformation, an institutional reform, a consolidation of the democracy, and improvement of the civil rights. And also in terms of foreign policy, because it has reinforced Spain's position within the EU, within the framework of the common foreign policy, or its role in NATO and its influence in the European decision-making process. Spain is one of the most influential countries. From the point of view of the political or ideological vision within the European Union, it is interesting to note that Spain is one of the countries that in the last European elections in June 2024 has not seen a rise in the Eurosceptic parties, or at least to a lesser extent than in other countries in the European Union. So Spain ranked second in the delegations of the two main political parties of the coalition that supports Ursula von der Leyen. This means that, well, the main political party in the European Parliament is the European People's Party. The second one is the Socialist and Democrats Party. So Spain having the second largest number of members of parliament in both parties, in the People's Party and in the Socialist Party, puts it in a very strong position for negotiations within the European Parliament. We can imagine other countries such as Germany, Italy, France, all of them have one of the delegations in those parties. But since they have stronger Eurosceptic parties that do not participate in the majorities of governments in Europe, and so they have somehow lost influence, Spain has larger influence. So as I was saying, Spain has a strong influence in Europe. It also has a government that, well, has been working hard with the general directorates of the Commission. And now in Spain, we have some of the best indicators if we are to analyze how much Spain supports the European Union. For example, 63% of Spaniards think that without the European Union, Spain would be worse off. 53.9% feel themselves to be citizens of both Spain and the EU. So this means that they have a strong sense of belonging to the European Union. And then 5% of the Spaniards feel that they are mainly European citizens. And then we have some more indicators about the confidence in the EU institutions. 44% of Spaniards have a great deal of confidence in the European Parliament or the Commission. And they also think that the European Union is something that will make the country have better opportunities in the future. And I want to finish by saying that one of the main concerns of Spaniards is about employment and the economy, and then the fight against poverty and social exclusion. These are at the heart of the Spaniards' concerns. And I also want to talk about the post-election survey in the European Union that give us some interesting data. For example, most Spaniards voted for the rolling global crisis and crisis. And then the confidence in institutions. And then I want to talk about some hot topics. For instance, housing. In Spain, no surprises here. And then misinformation. They affect the citizens in different ways. For the housing situation in the last decades, between 2015 and 2023, house prices in the European Union increased on average by 48%. In the case of Spain, the rise was 47% to reach an average price of between 2,200 or 2,400 euros per square meter. The main reasons for this rise in Spain were the rise in the construction costs and mortgage rates, the decline in construction, which limited supply, and the increased purchase of property as an investment to generate additional income. And then we have rental prices in the EU. They have also risen. Between 2010 and 2022, rental prices rose by an average of 18%, especially so after COVID. This was partly due to an increase in short-term rental contracts. And a direct consequence of this is that young Europeans leave the family home on average at 26 years of age. This age varies widely from country to country, and in the case of Spain, is around 30.5 years. I think it is interesting to note that housing prices in particular, I mentioned it earlier, I was talking about this with somebody in the bus. Some topics rely on Europe or depend on the European Union's intervention, and some others don't. Housing prices is not something that the European Union works directly upon, but after the elections, it was decided as a political symbol and as a symbol of public exercise, of an exercise with the citizenry. The European Union decided to create a commissioner for housing policies to see if we can put in place some European policies so that we can try and solve some of these concerns, especially for the younger generations. And so we have taken some measures starting in 2024. For instance, housing prices is now a priority for the European Union. There is now a specific commissioner, a commissioner from Denmark. And this is one of the topics that is being discussed by members of parliament in Europe, so that Europe can somehow foster the creation of affordable and sustainable homes. And there are some proposals on the table along these lines. And for this process to be faster, there is now a parliamentary commission, which is a group of members of parliament that discuss specific groups about something before relaying draft to the plenary session. And there will be a report that will be published soon in October. And so we see how the European Commission will try and support the member states on this issue. There is also another commission, the Committee on Regional Development, that is working on a report on the role of the cohesion policy in the housing crisis, to see how the cohesion elements of the policies in the European Union can also help in this housing crisis. At the same time, there is a platform for a pan-European affordable housing platform, and the European Investment Bank earmarks 10 billion euros over 2 years and is launching an advisory and financing portal. The same goes for fake news or the fight against disinformation in the European Union. We know that we are living in a context of virtual war on the control of the democracy. We have some external actors that want to influence the debate, and they have managed to do so. If we look at the elections of many European countries, the results of the elections of many European countries, and they they're using less criteria to win over some people for their political parties. And we also have the problem of the cyber attacks. So this is influencing our democracies. This is an interference that is influencing our democracies. And we also have a list of initiatives that are the so-called democratic shield that want to respond to these interferences. So we have this special committee on the European Shield of Democracy, tasked with proposing measures to strengthen our countries against the attacks. This commission is focusing on the interferences on the online platforms and how they interfere with the democracies and other attacks on critical infrastructure.
El trabajo
Their work will contribute to the European Commission's forthcoming initiative, the European Shield for Democracy. A public consultation just closed on this topic. It was aimed at addressing the most serious risks to democracy in the European Union. The European Commission has appointed a person who will be in charge of this topic. It's Finland's Henna Virkkuns, and she will be the executive vice president in charge of this. It was someone from Finland because there is the Russian threat that is very much present on Finland's borders. What else can I mention? Well, I started by discussing, my presentation started with vaccines, with COVID-19 COVIDs, and how the vaccines played out. COVID was a crisis, but also an opportunity to improve the health system. It taught us that the European Union can act fastly whenever this is necessary. I believe that the European Union is an example of regional integration. And right now, particularly since the global change due to Trump being elected in the US, since then, Europe is probably the region that is more attractive in terms of democracy. Many countries are looking to us as an example of democracy, as one of the few examples where human rights, minorities, diversity are still a pillar. And something that is also very important is that the European Union remains an example of integration, one of the most relevant one in the world, probably. We could say that it's a unique example. Our GDP accounts for 15% of the world's GDP. 18 trillion euro. Enrico Letta, Italy's former prime minister, said that in Europe there are small countries and countries that do not yet know that they are small. This means that we are all countries that wouldn't get anywhere by ourselves. We need integration to do anything we want to achieve. It's funny how I think today it's the ninth anniversary since the Brexit vote. We probably remember this pretty sad day. We woke up in the morning. I don't know if you felt the same thing. I woke up one day and saw that they had voted out, and I couldn't believe it. In those days, I had just gotten myself a little kitty. I had a little kitty, and this kitty was pretty whimsical, of course. You would bring your kitty home, a little kitten, and the kitten was scratching the door all the time. And when the kitty would get out, would start scratching the door to come in again. And that's why I called my little kitten Brexit. That's my cat's name, Brexit. It's funny in a way because at that specific time I was thinking that whenever they got out, a week after they would realize what they had done and they would realize that they did wrong and they would want in again. Now that's what statistics are pointing at, that 55% of those who voted, 55 is not what I thought. I thought it was going to be more people, but well, 55% of the UK's population would be in favor of returning to the European single space, to the European Union. European parties, even the more Eurosceptic ones, are not seriously talking about exiting the EU. It used to be something very popular in Spain, some parts of Italy, Austria, France. Parties, political parties in Spain, if you analyze their discourses in depth, the topic of exiting the European Union is not there. It's kind of like realizing that it's much colder outside. Well, or much warmer. It depends on how you want to look at it. However, the point is that it's more interesting to remain inside, even though sometimes it's hard. And even though the democratic debate can be hard and it can be complicated to move on, but however, we know that we're stronger when united. I mentioned the position of many young people and the attraction of democracies. And this is a great concern because there is an increasing number of young people who have a lower level of support to democracies. In other words, youth are the age that have the lowest level of trust in democracy as a way to manage their countries. This is probably because they haven't lived the war, they don't remember wars, they don't know what the direct consequences of not democratic ways of governance are. And we have forms of government that seem to work well, like China and other less democratic countries where it seems like efficiency is everything. And yes, obviously, efficiency shows that things work despite the fact that that has an impact on human rights, for example, and we are well aware of that. Some words about the Yuste Foundation. I think that the work you are doing here, particularly in the field of analysis and facilitation of European debates, but not only from a political science and law perspective or from the perspective of journalism,
de temas Unión Europea, pero
that is usually the topics that are usually concerned on the European Union. No, you have a very multidisciplinary approach, and that is fundamental because it helps us think about what we experience in our daily lives, not only from a political perspective or geopolitical perspective, also from a cultural perspective. And culture is a main challenge
personas, porque tenemos
to reach most people because there's a great distance between the European Union and citizens. Often, that is because the European Union hasn't reached our daily lives. There are many instruments in our hands And that is why I think the work that you do is fundamental. We have many tools to facilitate the debate and to help people understand what Europe means. Not only what has been done, but also what is still to be done in the next months and years. We have to discuss about how to make our lives more European and to understand the impact of the EU in our lives. I believe that this debate can help strengthen our democracies because, as I was saying, this aspect is somewhat vulnerable or it is at stake. The discussions that happen here are of fundamental importance to strengthen our democracies. So let's work well and let's be aware that we're not just here to improve and our lives and in to work in our interest. We have to work to improve Europe. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Franco, for your words and for showing us everything that has been done in the European Union. We agree that there is not enough knowledge about what has been done and the competences that Europe has when it comes to solving questions, because we look at Europe when there are problems and we don't realize that there are many solutions. But some other solutions have to come from the countries that have to respond to Europe. Jürgen mentioned some of the solutions that we should discuss. Thanks for making the effort of speaking in Spanish. It would have probably been easier for you to do so in English, but it was wonderful to hear you in Spanish. And thanks for sticking to the time that makes it possible for us to go on straight to the coffee break. We have 4 minutes for a discussion in case anyone has a burning question. If this is not the case, we can start the break. However, the introduction served to present all the topics that will be dealt with during the seminar. However, if you have any question for Franco, he's going to stay for coffee with us, so we can have a little discussion then. We have to cross this hallway, and we will be here in